So Dave Cullen, otherwise known as Computing Forever, has decided to convert to Christianity. I find it refreshing that he has come to the realization that his conservative beliefs are not really compatible with skepticism.
When you take the metaphorical red pill, it's just the first epiphany, the first layer. You realize how much you've been lied to all your life. You discover that you've been fed an ideology perpetuated through biased narratives and spin.
Yeah, like when I was growing up, I was taught that if you do drugs once, your life will be instantly ruined. I was taught that markets are fundamentally democratic. I was taught that being gay is a mental illness and that you can't be moral if you're an atheist. As I grew up, I saw that these lessons were totally contradicted by what I actually experience.
You begin to discern truth from illusion and reject the programming that they attempted to indoctrinate you with. Now, if the red pill is the means by which you discover that you've been lied to, the black pill is how you learn just how dangerous those lies truly were. The black pill is where you descend down the rabbit hole further and learn just how bad things have become. It's where the consequences of evil become truly apparent. It's also the point where you begin to experience a degree of hopelessness and despondence. This is the point of rock bottom. But luckily from there, the only way is up. Things can seem bleak, but it's virtually impossible to stay black-pilled for long. It's simply too difficult to entertain nihilism or despair for extended periods of time. Eventually, an appetite for hope, optimism, and meaning begins to develop. The soul requires nourishment. Enter the white pill, also known as the God pill. You begin to desire action, order, purpose, and a semblance of values in your life. The world may be going crazy, but you're not going to. The very values that have been stripped from Western nations by the left for the last 50 years gradually begin to make sense.
By becoming Christian, you're not just accepting values, you're accepting beliefs and assertions. Even if you value things like abstaining from extramarital sex or carrying every embryo to term, even though that's not really in the Bible, or whatever, you can value those things without accepting the proposition that there is a timeless, spaceless, disembodied mind who created the universe and sacrificed himself to appease his own anger at everyone else. You don't need to be a Christian to be a giant square. Dave is attracted to Christianity not because evidence has convinced him that there is a God and that Jesus rose from the grave, but rather because he wants there to be a cosmic authority and he likes the rules of the religion of Christianity specifically.
I guess I considered myself an atheist since I was about 13. I rejected the religious teachings of my parents, who were both devout Catholics and quite conservative, and as I entered my teenage years, I began to become more liberal, and I believed that I could have all the answers, that science and secularism were adequate substitutes for religion and faith. But as I grew older, I also became more conservative, and I began to realize that the wisdom of my parents was based on something timeless, universal, and tried and tested for thousands of years, that the teachings of Christ were a set of rules and instructions that not only made intuitive sense when carefully studied, but actually had been essential in building and maintaining our Western civilization.
Like what exactly? Dave believes that Christian rules have been time-tested, but doesn't seem to realize that they have often failed those tests. He doesn't seem to care about the misery that those rules have imposed upon non-believers, gay folks, trans folks, religious folks who are non-Christians, and Christian folks who are the wrong kind of Christian. Externally imposing religious rules on people also doesn't seem to work, which can clearly be seen when you compare the most religious American states to the least religious ones. The states with the most violence are the most religious ones, and the least violent states are the least religious ones. A culture being religious doesn't seem to give much, if any, assurance of stability or harmony.
While a decade ago I had buried myself in The Horseman, in my mid to late 20s watching Hitch, Harris, Dawkins and Dennett own religious apologists in debates time and time again, I had, however, dismissed all too quickly that the Horsemen were simply unable to adequately refute the claim that you cannot get an ought from an is.
Well, outside of Harris, I don't think they were trying. The is-ought problem is a problem for anyone who asserts that there is an objective ought, which is more typical of theists. Just because there is a God, if there in fact is one, who gives commandments, that doesn't mean that we therefore ought to obey them. That simply doesn't follow.
Science is the means by which we understand the physical world around us. It is not the means by which we derive our morality. For that, we need philosophy, metaphysics, religion. Human beings need relatable stories, instructions, parables, in order to develop a moral and ethical framework in which to live.
Why do you need a moral or ethical framework? Why can't you just follow your conscience?
Science and religion are actually not in conflict, as some atheists believe. They're not actually in competition. One is the means by which we understand the physical world around us. The other is the means by which we derive meaning and moral instruction.
People use religion for a lot more than merely deriving moral instruction. Many do, in fact, use it to try to understand how the universe works. I'd like it if religion and science were treated by religious people as non-overlapping magisteria, as Stephen Jay Gould called them. But that's just not how people use religion, Dave. I think Dave understands that the beliefs that go along with his favorite religion, like creationism, the flood, etc., are silly, and he intends to simply ignore them and focus on the rules that dictate gender roles and tell you not to fap.
This system may even form the basis of a legal system or constitution for a nation-state to live by, but the core philosophy must be based upon something that cannot be altered or replaced by man-made ideals.
You mean something stagnant? Something that we just have to live with no matter how miserable it makes us? Something that, as technology develops, will be totally ill-equipped to guide us through ethical quandaries we can't even predict yet?
It's the idea that there is a higher power that man is answerable to, that governments and politicians cannot challenge.
Dave doesn't like state authority or any kind of human authority, but his solution to that is to defer to a greater cosmic authority rather than to question the value of authority itself. He thinks that this puts authority out of the hands of fallible human beings, but even if there is a God and the Bible contains his commandments, it is still ultimately human beings who will be enforcing them and interpreting them unless a booming voice from the sky steps in every now and then and tells us whether we're doing it right. Since that's the case, biblical rules are not outside of human hands or influence. Rather than constraining human abuses of power, the ability to convince people that they are doing a God's work has repeatedly been used to tyrannical ends. I say that if human beings are going to be doing enforcing and interpreting anyway, they might as well be enforcing and interpreting their own rules rather than the rules written for Judeans thousands of years ago.
That the state is beholden to the values and morals that the populace subscribe to.
What? Where in Christianity does it say that the state is beholden to the values and morals of the populace?
And what is it? It's a mechanism to take the most fundamental rights of human beings and place them out of the reach of human beings, so they can't be interfered with.
But as long as it is humans who have the job of protecting those rights, they are within the reach of people. They can be interfered with. Let's say there is a God and that God gives us rights. What good are those rights to us if they are not also respected by people, especially people in power?
And that's how you protect human beings from tyranny.
It doesn't seem to be working, though. There's no shortage of Catholic tyrannies and Catholic-endorsed tyrannies.
Nations and even empires that lose religion tend to collapse within a couple of generations. This is the pattern that John Glubb observed time and time again when he catalogued the rise and fall of great powers throughout history.
That seems to be the opposite conclusion that Edward Gibbon came to in the decline and fall of the Roman Empire. He blamed the collapse of Rome partially on the empire's conversion to Christianity. Also, if what Dave's saying is the case, why is it that the least religious states in the US and the least religious countries in general seem to be the most stable and least violent? Also, why should I want there to even be such a thing as great powers? They seem largely to be a nuisance because they insist on throwing their weight around. If a decline in religion causes great powers to collapse, that seems to me like a good thing.
When an age of decadence is reached in a society, an age of liberalism follows. When you take God out of the equation, man tries to become God. Communism, which is once again trying to infiltrate every facet of our culture and compromise our institutions in the form of globalism, believes that the state is God.
What do you think globalism is? It seems to me that globalism is expanding any kind of enterprise across the world. When this is done by corporations, as it frequently is, it is what Lenin called imperialism, and he understood it to be the highest stage of capitalism. Perhaps what Dave has in mind is the opening of borders, free trade agreements, and multinational governments like the European Union. What he doesn't seem to realize is that these things exist primarily to serve capital and the free flow thereof. The whole point of the European Union is to make commerce simpler and easier between its member states. Globalism, as it currently occurs, is encouraged and incentivized by capitalism, not communism.
Everything the left has done has been a gradual attempt to take people away from who and what they are and where they came from. Christianity celebrates the vital importance of the family unit, the most powerful defense against an authoritarian state. In Christianity, the roles of men and women are clearly defined, with great respect given to the unique roles of the mother and the father, and the importance of raising children in a set of values shared by other members of our community and tribe.
If the family unit is the most powerful defense against an authoritarian state, then why didn't it protect Germany? They had traditional gender roles that were strongly enforced. Do you think there are no family units or strict gender roles in China or Saudi Arabia?
The community building aspect of the religious service, the Mass, and the profession of faith ensure that everyone knows they are part of something bigger than themselves, that there's an authority beyond a democratically elected politician in office.
So do the Muslims in Iran not know that there's a power beyond the Ayatollah? Is that why he hasn't been overthrown? Or is it maybe the case that theism and the family unit don't really grant a society much protection from tyranny? And what exactly is the mechanism here? How is a family unit even supposed to protect against tyranny? Do you mean that if you can rely on your family, you're less reliant on the state? If that's the case, then how does this help kids who have been disowned for being gay or atheist? If kids have to keep that kind of thing a secret because they are dependent upon their families, then those families become tyrannical.
This is how a nation-state is maintained, by recognizing the value of the family. As you can see, it's not hard to understand why the leftist cultural Marxists have attacked religion and the family at every turn.
I don't see a lot of people on the left attacking the family. How many leftists are telling people who want families not to have them? I see conservatives telling gay couples not to get married or raise children. That's an attack on families. I see mothers who choose to work outside the home be criticized, or stay-at-home dads be ridiculed by the right. That's attacking families. I see conservative parents disowning their gay children. That's destroying families.
This is what Yuri Bezmenov covered extensively in his lectures. The subversion of America, like many Western nations, has taken place by promoting hedonism, sexuality, drugs, and the obsession with materialism, individual rights, and individualism.
Didn't you earlier say that they were promoting communism? Which is it? Are they promoting materialism and individualism, or are they promoting communism? I don't see how they could simultaneously be doing both.
Anything that gets people away from Christianity, settling down, starting a family, and raising their children in the value system of their ancestors.
I don't see why the transphobic, homophobic, racist value system of my ancestors is something that I should want to settle into.
Now, even if you're not religious, even if you don't take the stories of Jesus literally, you can probably acknowledge that an origin story about the birth of a child and a savior born to bring peace to the world is a powerful message and a symbol of hope for future generations. But if people are encouraged to move away from Christianity, then they lose attachment to this story, and the origin story of who and what they are becomes rewritten. It's replaced with a focus on the worst moments in our history. This is why in many modern liberalized Western nations nowadays, the native people are being encouraged to be ashamed of their past. In social justice-infested college courses in America, young Americans are brainwashed into self-loathing. They're encouraged to feel guilty for atrocities committed by their ancestors from hundreds of years ago. The same is true of many European nations. Their people are being encouraged to feel an intense sense of guilt and self-hatred for their colonial past, for example. So once the story we told ourselves about where we came from spiritually was based on the hope of a young child being born who could usher in a new age of peace for all humanity, now it's about negativity, despair, and hopelessness.
It's about exactly the opposite. By seeing how bad things were and are, it becomes easier to see how much better we can do. By acknowledging how shitty the past was, and to a large degree how shitty the present is, we set the stage for building a future that is far superior. In contrast, Dave's worldview is that the tribalism, parochialism, and stifling gender roles of the past is the best we can do, and by trying to improve upon it will only make things worse. That is a grim and hopeless view of humanity.
So the left has literally become like a death cult.
Yes, the left, which typically wants to discourage war, the death penalty, and ensure everyone gets unconditional access to healthcare, is like a death cult. While the people who think that folks only live on Earth so they can prove themselves worthy of an eternally happy afterlife are totally not a death cult.
You see, although the promotion of left-wing ideology is ultimately about power, it's also not quite as simple as a straightforward attack on conservatism. It's an attack on Christianity that goes back as far as the crucifixion of Christ. getting people away from their Christian heritage and values, disconnecting people from God, and making them docile and compliant by promoting distractions that placate the masses. Consumerism, pornography, sex, instant gratification, drugs, and materialism.
Again, how much tinfoil must your hat contain to believe that materialism and consumerism are the fault of the left? How obtuse do you have to be to pretend that these are not explicitly capitalist phenomena?
What has the left been promoting for the past number of decades? Temptation, sin, greed, materialism, deviation from the path, a denial of nature. If you corrupt the people, promote vice and their baser animal instincts, you bring about the destruction of the nation state. Promiscuity rather than monogamy results in unplanned pregnancy, broken homes, low parental investment. Marriage is destroyed by feminism. Alternative lifestyles are promoted. The act of sexual union between two people is no longer respected. Pregnancy and the creation of new life becomes a nuisance. By no longer believing in a power beyond man, the state becomes the thing that everyone relies on. From welfare to their rights. It becomes extremely powerful and soon after, authoritarian.
And where has this ever happened exactly? What country has ever become tyrannical as a result of letting people choose when to have or not have children, letting gay couples get married, or accepting trans folks as being the gender with which they identify? It seems to me that the most tyrannical countries are the ones that do exactly the opposite of those things.
Suddenly, in those few words of the Our Father, I had gained an insight and a truth that had been hiding in plain sight my whole life. As E. Michael Jones would call it, logos. St. Augustine said that a man has as many masters as he has vices. And as E. Michael Jones has talked about, the left has sold vice as a form of liberation. In truth, we become enslaved to our base, greedy and primitive natures, and thus much easier for governments to control.
I guess Dave thinks the left is anyone who wants the government to have more power. In reality, capitalists are just as likely, if not more likely, to use the state to rent-seek, that is, to lobby it to their advantage. The left uses the state to try to defend people from this.
The people become docile and malleable and atomized, especially since identity politics is promoted to further divide and conquer people. Our nations are also becoming increasingly less safe under leftist control.
If your nations are less safe, why have violent crime rates been falling for 25 years?
Evil is only maintained so long as people stray from the path. You empower it by giving it your attention. Think of it another way. If you're driving to a destination and you have two possible roads before you, once you know that you're on the correct road, you don't need to give any attention to the wrong road anymore. You don't need to focus on the darkness when you're looking towards the light. As Bezmenov explained, the antidote to Marxist subversion is to ignore its tactics and focus on religion instead.
Well, that's not exactly what you're doing with this video, is it? This video is all the left this and the left that, most of which is stuff that capitalism is actually doing.
If you change the values of a nation's people, you change the nation. If you distract the people with concerns about rights this and rights that, hedonism, sexuality, etc., they will become focused on selfish navel-gazing and concerns that don't matter.
Didn't you earlier say that we need to take your God seriously because that's the only way to reliably protect our rights? Why are you now all like rights schmites? To everyone who helps me out on Patreon, you're a big help. Thanks so much.